Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Parsha Pearls. We're currently starting the story of the Jewish servitude in Egypt in the book of Exodus. It's a story which spans three portions, filled with trials and tribulations, defeats and triumphs, exile, and ultimately, of course, the Exodus. So I'm going to ask if you could spend a few moments indulging me, if you will, because I want to share my imagination with you. Picture the following scenario. At the airport in Cairo, Egypt, an Egypt Air jet lands. And on board is a man dressed in royal attire. He's being transported from the past to come along and check out his native Egyptians. He has a lot to catch up on. He disembarks and he's greeted by some official personnel. He speaks, but they don't understand a word he's saying. They locate a translator who knows some ancient Egyptian who reads a hieroglyph or two in his day. Who are you? The officials ask through the interpreter. I am Pharaoh, king of the greatest empire in the world. What can we do for you? Well, how is my empire doing? Empire? What empire? It's crumbled. It's long gone. The Sphinx is in bad condition. Pharaoh replies, that's terrible. What about the solar temple of Ra? Are they still worshiping the sun god today? Pharaoh, there is no solar temple in Egypt. There are no solar panels and nobody worships them except maybe in California. What about my Hebrew slaves? Are they still building pyramids? To be honest, the Hebrews are still building, only now it's skyscrapers and technology and medicine, but not specifically for Egypt. And they are a free and they are a vibrant nation now, just next door. Pharaoh is bewildered, gets back on his plane. The future is not quite what he imagined it would be. In another part of the world, an Alitalia flight lands at an airport near Rome. Again, an old man disembarks. He adjusts his toga. He's trying to communicate. Nobody knows what he's talking about. He keeps pointing to himself, saying, Julius Caesar, waiting for everybody to bow before him. Nobody does. So again, they find a translator who knows ancient Latin, a far cry from the Italian that you will hear in Rome today. He says, take me to the Colosseum so I can enjoy watching the gladiators. And the translator hesitates. Mr. Caesar, around here, you're known more as a salad these days. The Colosseum is in ruins. Caesar says, okay, so take me to the temple of Jupiter, Mr. Caesar. Who is Jupiter? We have the Vatican here. It's a church, a different religion altogether called Catholicism. It's got a pope. The only Jupiter is a few million miles away. So the emperor says, okay, in that case, how many nations nowadays are under the control of the mighty Roman Empire? Do we still control most of the world? The man replies, no, there aren't that many people living in Rome nowadays. It's a small city in an almost bankrupt country. Ancient Rome is gone. History, the stuff of bad movies. And he too leaves despondent and dejected. Meanwhile, whilst all this is going on, an El Al aircraft lands in Tel Aviv. An old man with a flowing white beard steps off the plane. A government official sees this saintly looking fellow. He walks over to him and he says, Shalom. And the man answers with a smile, Shalom. They immediately understand each other. It's an honor to meet you. What is your name? The man responds, Moshe. He says, really? My name is Moshe too. Moshe Katzenberg from Lud, born in Russia. He says, I am Moshe Rabbeinu. Some call me Moses, from the desert, born in Egypt. Have you ever been to Israel before? No, this is actually my first time. Moses continues. My dear brother, Moshe Katzenberg, may I ask you for a big favor? And Moshe Katzenberg says, of course. He says, I just finished flying through the night. And I realize I don't have my tefillin with me. Can you tell me where I might be able to get a pair of tefillin? And without hesitation, Moshe Katzenberg says, of course, you can borrow mine. Moshe says, please. And he continues, listen, I don't mean to be a nutnik, but is there anywhere around here I can catch a minyan for Shacharis? Betach Rabbeinu. Katzenberg says, of course, Rabbi, right here in Ben Gurion Airport, we have a synagogue. In fact, not just one, we have 3 synagogues, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Hasidic, whichever you like. So Moses proceeds to one of the synagogues, can't tell you which one, and the service begins. During the prayers, the worshipers take the Torah out and they call Moses up for a call-up, for an aliyah. He's in awe. It's the same Torah written with the exact same letters as the one that he himself had taken communication and dictation, as it were, from God 3,300 years ago. He recognizes the handwriting, same religion, same language, same commandments, same homeland. This is remarkable. And the point I want to make is this: every ancient people from Egypt to Rome was destroyed, scattered, disappeared into the mists of history. But the Jewish people miraculously survived with their faith intact. And in our own parents' or grandparents' lifetime, it was restored to sovereignty. They were restored to their own ancient homeland. And Hebrew, the very language of the Torah that Moses wrote, is now the daily tongue of a vibrant nation of 7 million. As historian Barbara Tuchman wrote, Israel is the only nation in the world that is governing itself in the same territory, under the same name, and with the same religion and same language as it did 3,000 years ago. So how did it happen? How did a group of powerless slaves survive when even the mightiest empires like Egypt or Rome vanished? And the answer is this: ancient Egypt and ancient Israel were nations that asked the ultimate question: how, in a world that changes, do we build a civilization that will endure? How do we defeat mortality? Pharaoh gave one answer, an answer that has long appealed to rulers and kings. The strength of a nation lies in horses and chariots and tanks and armies and colossal buildings, in power and in wealth. Build these and your nation will defy the vicissitudes of time. And Pharaoh did that, and Caesar did that, and others did that, and today their civilizations are long gone. Their monuments survive, but their moment has passed. Moses gave a completely different answer. The strength of a nation does not lie in power and wealth. It depends on the values that you engrave on the hearts of the next generation. Over and again, Moshe instructs the people by God's directive. And as we say this on Seder night, tell your children the story of the Exodus. Explain how we were commanded to create a society that is the opposite of ancient Egypt. One based not on wealth or power, but on justice and compassion. A society where a loving God is sovereign and every citizen, without exception, is created in his image. A society in which everyone has access to justice, every mitzvah is cherished, and everybody is treated with dignity. Teach your children these values, encourage them to ask questions, celebrate your Exodus annually as we do, and you will create an eternal people. Your story will endure and carry you along with it. And so every year, as we start the Shabbat, the book of Exodus, we read it, we celebrate the miraculous journey of the Jewish people across time. Scorned by a succession of tyrants, we passed on our tradition. We overcame all obstacles with a fierce tenacity, built loving homes, battled barbarity with hope, menace with mitzvah, and outlived the strongest empires that history has ever known. And as per this week's portion, 3,330-something years ago, Pharaoh and Moses met in the arena. Pharaoh was on the throne, and Moses was armed with a simple message and a secret strength. All these years on, Pharaoh is left languishing in the arena, and history declares Moses won. Then there's one other thing I'd like to consider. The Torah gives, after all, a lot of airtime to Pharaoh. It gets a lot of mention during these various portions. Why? Obviously, yes, even the ruthless tyrant himself has something to teach us. He has some kind of profound life lesson that we can learn even from him. And it is this, and I've referenced this before, the 10,000-hour rule, which posits that to properly master anything, you have to practice a skill for 10,000 hours. And it applies no matter whatever the skill or the craft. If you want to become a master golfer, mechanic, chef, footballer, surgeon, salesperson, even a rabbi, you have to put in your 10,000 hours. But what fundamentally is the rationale behind this theory? Repetitiveness is enough to enable one to become a master? Well, perhaps we can glean some insight, again, from Pharaoh. Because there's a certain injustice seeming in the whole Exodus story. A recurring theme that we find throughout is the reference to God hardening Pharaoh's heart. It implies that Pharaoh might have wanted to let the Jewish people go, only God hardened his heart. Hence, he refused to do so. And then thereafter, God rains plagues down upon him because of his refusal. Moses says, let my people go. Pharaoh wants to. God hardens his heart. He says no. God punishes him. Where's the justice of that? And that takes us back to the 10,000-hour rule. There's a famous phrase in the Talmud, in the language of the Talmud, hergel na'aseh teva, which means that when you do something enough times, it becomes second nature to you. In psychological terms, you become a creature of habit. When we're doing something that is habitual, we're not engaged in the task in the same way as when we are doing something that is not habitual. Consider making breakfast in your own kitchen on any given weekday. Next time you do it, just watch how effortlessly it happens. Your movements through the kitchen, they're natural, they're stereotyped. You don't think about it, it just happens. You grab the milk out of the fridge. You automatically turn towards the counter. You give the door that same nudge every day with your foot. And if something is on your mind, you might not even notice that you're sitting at the table already munching on your second piece of toast with jam until you're halfway through it. And try comparing that to getting breakfast at a friend's house. Oh my goodness, where's the milk? Where's the bread? It's so complicated. You know, we sometimes say you just can't help yourself. What does that mean? Someone resolves to change their bad habits, but time and again they fail. Why? You're failing because, simply put, habits are extremely hard to change. They're hard to change because they're so ingrained, they're so almost automatic. So in Pharaoh's case, it's not that God deliberately hardened his heart and impeded his choice, his decision-making. That would be wholly unjust. Initially, Pharaoh hardened his own heart several times over. He was committed to the persecution of the Jewish people. And after that, he essentially became addicted to the evil he was perpetuating. He can't break the cycle. Each time after a plague, when he said, I'm going to let the people go, he probably really meant it. In the midst of the suffering, it made sense to him to break the cycle, but no sooner does the plague stop and he's back in the vicious loop. So God hardening Pharaoh's heart really means that God implemented the laws of nature as we know them, and by virtue of Pharaoh's own initial obstinacy, his heart becomes invariably hardened, such that he can't help himself. He can't kick the habit. Now, let's be honest. As human beings, we're all creatures of one habit or another, which really, to be frank, define our personality. The creature we become is defined by the habit we nurture. First, we make our habits, then our habits make us. As Benjamin Franklin once said, your net worth to the world is usually determined by what happens when your bad habits are deducted from your good ones. So sometimes Pharaoh teaches us we need to take an inward look and ask ourselves, what are my habits? What do they say about me? How do they define me? And if they're not good, how can I break them or change them? So even though we get locked into certain patterns almost every day of our lives, and these idiosyncrasies are a major part of who we are, fundamental to Jewish thinking, and indeed general psychology, is that there's no such thing as this is who I am and this is all I can be, with the exception of Freud, perhaps. There's no such thing as I am stuck in this pattern and there's no way out. We are in control of our own lives. And the secret to breaking any bad habit is to change it to a good one. Maimonides maintains that when you're veering in one negative direction, you have to first go to the opposite extreme before you can find your happy middle ground. The analogy used is that of a piece of paper. When it's bent one way, only when you bend it back the other way are you able to keep it straight. But more than anything, you have to want to change. You have to be present and able to identify whatever the habits as soon as you feel them emerging, and then look to replace them with something good. So yes, even the tyrant Pharaoh teaches where bad habits can lead and how they can wreak havoc with our lives. But we also learn that there is the very real ability to make changes, and a change in habit leads to a fundamental change in life. Cultivate your habits to be positive and meaningful, because whilst you can't change your future, you can change your habits, and they ultimately become your future and your destiny.